Hey Kipsters, let's review the two articles or the two texts that we read a couple of weeks ago. So, in order to review them, Ms. Arnold went ahead and made two charts. This is the first chart for text 1, A Divided Nation. As we read that text, we annotated for attitudes, which are beliefs, policies, laws, and rules, and attempts to change. I went ahead and put the ideas we annotated along with the evidence that we underlined to support those ideas. Let's go through text 1's chart, and then we'll go through text number 2. So if we look at the attitudes that we found as we read text 1, we came across racism. Evidence for that can be found in paragraph 5. We came across the fear of being mocked. We also find evidence for that in paragraph 5. And we came across the idea that slavery was the key to wealth. And we found evidence of that in paragraph 9 and paragraph 15. We annotated policies or laws and rules such as oppression, found evidence for that in paragraph 1, slavery, and we found evidence for that in paragraph 2. Another example for slavery, it says they became slaves. It solved an economic problem for planters. Slaves made a cheap, easy source of labor. If we go over to attempts to change, we annotated government wanted to change. All right. After the Revolutionary War, slavery was outlawed in most northern states. We found that in paragraph 3. We annotated that ideas that showed that beliefs were shifting. Southerners wanted to expand slavery, however, the North did not. It's paragraph 6. We also see more beliefs shifting in paragraph 10 and paragraph 15. We also saw evidence that new laws were being passed. That was another attempt to change that we saw, and we have evidence of that in paragraph 20. So that is a breakdown of things that we annotated and the evidence that we found in text 1. Now we're going to look at the chart for text 2. Has this very similar setup. Let's review the attitudes, policies, and attempts to change that we annotated in text 2, Dark Days in the South. In text 2, we also saw racism. We found that in paragraph 7. We saw several instances of violence, which I categorize it as violence or racism. It is up to you which one you want to write about it as, but I want you to know that it can be both. All right? So if you'd like to use it as an example of racism, fine. If you would like to use it as an example of violence, also fine, because we understand that they are being violent because they are racist. Another example of racism and another example that could be violence or racism. Okay, found in paragraph 13, found in paragraph 14. Policies or laws and rules that we annotated, black codes, found evidence for that in paragraph 5. Poll tax, found evidence for that in paragraph 13, 2 pieces. Segregation, found evidence for that in paragraph 15, and poll tax again, evidence for that in paragraph 22. Attempts to change that we annotated, again, the idea that the government wanted to change. Lincoln wanted slaves to be citizens, paragraph 2. Continuing with the idea the government wanted to change, we found evidence of that in paragraph 6. We saw a little bit of abolitionist ideas and attempts to change. We annotate that in paragraph 30. And then new laws were passed. We see that in paragraph 32. So here is a breakdown of the attitudes, policies, and attempts to change that we annotated from each text. This is not the complete list. All right? We made a lot more annotations, but this is something that you can use to get you started. And if you would like to find a different piece of evidence, you are more than welcome to use the copy of the text that you annotated along with us when we did this last week. Now, After we review our chart, I want us to just briefly talk about the thesis statement and how that's going to flow and how your chart can help you write your thesis statement. Focus your attention on the black box. Your thesis statement needs to mention an attitude, one of these, policy, one of these, and change, one of these. Use the charts above and one of the sentence frames below to craft your thesis statement. Use at least one idea, or you could think of them as reasons, from each text in your thesis statement. So, I'm going to provide you with several sentence stems. You can use in both A Divided Nation and Dark Days in the South, because we want to name both texts in our thesis. African Americans were prevented from achieving equality by attitudes and policies like blank and blank. Attempts to change these attitudes and policies were made by blank. Your thesis statement is going to be 2 sentences, and that's okay because there's a lot of information that we have to relay to the reader. I named both texts, and I also restated the question. African Americans were prevented from achieving equality. Then I have my by statement. By attitudes and policies like, this is where you put an attitude, this is where you put a policy. Attempts to change these attitudes and policies were made by, this is where you would put one of the attempts to change. So, if I was actually writing a thesis statement right now, I would go back up into my chart and think about one of the policies and attitudes that I wanted to include in my thesis statement that I want to write about in my essay. So if I was to scroll back up right now, I would look through attitudes. We want to be able to use ideas from both texts so that we can pull evidence from both texts. So I'm scrolling. I might use the fear of being mocked. So I'd come down to my thesis statement and I'd write fear or the fear of being mocked. All right, so I have my attitude. Now I need to look for a policy. All right, poll tax, black code, segregation, slavery, oppression. I'm going to go with segregation. I spelled it wrong. That's okay. Here we go. And then I need to find a change. Attempts to change these attitudes and policies were made by. I need to go scroll up and find a change. Abolitionists, new laws are passed, government wanted to change. Government wanted to change, beliefs shifted. I'm going to go with government wanted to change. Made by attempts to change these attitudes and policies were made by the government once they began to want change. Now, boom, I have my thesis statement. All right? I have an attitude and a policy. My attitude came from text 1, A Divided Nation. So I will be using evidence from one text. My policy came from text 2, Dark Days in the South. So I will use the evidence from that second text. So I already covered that idea. And my attempt to change, there's evidence that can be found in text 1 for government wanted to change, and text 2 for government wanted to change, which is awesome. You want to make sure that the change you use, there are multiple pieces of evidence to support it. That's enough review for now. We'll talk more about thesis statements and assertions.